Welcome back to another edition of the Wolverine.com podcast, our TV edition. My name's Chris Balas. With me, Doug Skene. Those who stay will be champions in the background. 5-time Big Ten champion, Skene. It's got to be tough going on 17 years. We're going to keep this thing positive. We had a message board poster basically call you out on the last podcast. First of all, I want to talk about this. And he said that our last post-game podcast, you sounded disappointed that they won. And then me too, to a certain extent. And I didn't respond very well to that after deleting the post. I said that it was one of the dumbest message board posts I've ever seen. I can't imagine that you were disappointed that Michigan won that game as a 5-time Big Ten champion.
No. So first of all, anybody's entitled to their opinion. And anybody can be as brave as they want behind their keyboard. It's kind of the thing to do today nowadays, right? So you and I, we do these podcasts, Balas, and having my insight and background of having been there, done that, been through the program and watched the highs and lows of Michigan football now for the last 25, 30 years that I've been gone. I'm at the point in my life when we watch these things, we're trying to be as objective as possible. Under no circumstances am I disappointed that Michigan won the football game. Good grief. So, I think someone might be trying to project something else here that I don't know what it is. And quite frankly, whatever, it's fine. Just trying to be real. I've come into the season, and I know you and I have talked about it, raised some eyebrows when I didn't think they were going to be very good. And I still don't know. But I've also said along the way, I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many times I can say that. Maybe people didn't hear that part. I hope I'm wrong. And so I said 5-7 coming into the season. I'm trying to be objective. I'm going off of the last few seasons of patterns and trends that I see in the way this team performs. And so I make my predictions and I make my insights, and they are what they are. I used to go on these podcasts, Balas, and I used to just say, Michigan's undefeated every year. We're going to win every game. And it was kind of a joke. And then it became a real kind of not so funny joke because the team was getting worse. And then all of a sudden we're getting blown off the field by our peer institutions and competitors in our league. So at this point, I'm trying to be as objective and as real as possible and let people know, and you and I are talking about this, so what I think is a realistic viewpoint from my chair of what I see on Saturdays.
And that's fair. And we appreciate that. And that's why you're here. If we wanted a sunshine blower, we'd go find somebody else.
So that used to be me, and then I got skewered to that too.
Now you understand the pain and how hard this is, and the struggle, the daily struggle of a podcast, Skene. So You've been part of it for a long time, and you've always kept it real and honest, and that's what I appreciate about you. I'm not changing my prediction. I said 7-5. You look at some of the first week games, you look at Nebraska, for example, doesn't look as good, but you can't read anything into one game. And I think that last year made that pretty damn clear. You look at Minnesota and you look at Nebraska when they played, they lost to Illinois. Illinois comes back and loses to Texas, San Antonio. Every game is different. Some teams are going to improve. If you went back and looked at the 2007 Michigan team, Skene, Appalachian State, Oregon, loss, blowout, you would have thought they wouldn't win another game. There they were at the end with a chance to compete and beat Ohio State for a Big Ten championship. Didn't do it, but things are going to change and things are going to happen.
Yeah, so you say you can't take anything from a week one game. It's mostly true, Balas. You can take some things.
Yes.
As we talked about in our post-game podcast, this is a starting point. We've seen in the game against Western, we saw some good things. We saw some things to point it out in our film breakdown that we did. Some really outstanding things by some of the players on the Michigan offense, and then some things that are kind of clunky and need to be fixed. But that's not unusual of a week one thing. So it's an indicator. Week two, we'll see if the arrow is going to be in an ascending fashion and heading in a positive way, hopefully with a victory. Or are we going to be starting, taking a step backwards? A year ago, we had a very similar post-week one feeling. Hey, we had a pretty successful week one. And then week two was a disaster. So history has an opportunity of repeating itself here. And it'll be interesting to see how this goes. But we saw enough in week one to go, okay, they won the game. That's good. Michigan's 1-0. They should have beat Western. A new challenge awaits this Saturday night.
And I'll tell you what, this Washington team loses 13-7 to Montana. That might be the worst thing that happened to Michigan, I'll be honest. And I'm not saying that Michigan's going to lose. I'm not saying they're going to blow Washington out. I've seen a lot of predictions, 34-13 and 34-10, and how is Washington going to score? Well, number one, they've got a bigger offensive line. We don't know because we haven't seen enough of this Michigan defensive line, and this is not being negative. It's just being honest. We saw them playing with their hands down, two guys with their hands down most of that game. They're going to play a completely different scheme when they face Washington, which, as Josh Gaddis, the offensive coordinator, said today, they're going to try to ram it down our throat. They're going to try to run the ball. They're going to try to run some play action off it. Steve Klinkscale, I think, actually said that. And they're going to try to do what they do with their big offensive line. And there's no guarantee that Michigan's got the beef up front to be able to stop that. Now, if Washington's able to do that and shorten the game, their defense was fine. And I think their defense is going to be really good. They've got some really good corners. They've got a stout defensive line. We don't know how Michigan's offensive line is going to hold up against that. Western Michigan was overmatched. So to sit there and look at those two, and this is kind of what I was getting at, looking at those two results and saying, okay, Michigan should easily win this game, to me is fool's gold.
Well, it's fool's gold because we've seen this movie before, and we know how this went a year ago. Specifically speaking, if you look at the interior defensive line of Washington, they got two big active interior defensive tackles that can move pretty well. They are physically bigger and more athletic than the guys that played on the interior line from Western Michigan. That will present a new challenge for the center and guards that Michigan's going to take the field with on Saturday night. Their linebackers are going to run better. In the world of recruiting, you're generally going to have your best, most athletic, biggest, tallest, fastest, best players at the big-time Power 5 Division I level. We played a MAC team last week. It's no disrespect to the young men that play for Western. Collectively speaking, the athleticism on the defensive front for Western Michigan is not as athletic as the defensive front at the University of Washington. That's just a fact. So this presents a new set of challenges, and we will see if some of the positive indicators that we saw against Western can continue to be built upon against Washington. On the other side, some of the negative indicators in some of those situations and a few of those snaps, so the things that we saw from the Western game need to be fixed if we're going to have the success against Washington. This is not being a hater, according to your one guy on your website there that likes to, point fingers and say that I'm just a negative guy. I'm just being real. You have to look at this physical nature of what you're up against and what Michigan has done and what they're going to try to do. I'm guessing they're going to line up and run a lot of pull the guard, pull the tight end, try to kick blocks and edges and block down the front, roll up on the inside there and run some power football. If Western is any indicator that this is what the running game of Michigan football is going to look like in 2021, then there's going to have to be some better front side blocking. So that we'll see how that goes. It doesn't mean they can't do it. We've seen that they can against Western. Can they do it against Washington?
Yeah, I asked Josh Gaddis if we're going to see more of Zach Zinter today. I think that's a key. Chuck Filiaga had some good moments. He struggled in a lot of plays. People can rip us for that too, and they did. You pointed out, and he still had some issues with getting off the ball. He had a couple of times where he went the wrong way. Maybe that's to be expected if you move over to right guard when you've played left guard most of the time. I don't know. To me, that's just a concentration thing and knowing the playbook. However, with Zinter in there, number one, I'm going to ask you, have you ever played with a bad hand, and how tough is that? Obviously, now you can grab between the pads, and getting hands on guys is very important. Is it tough? Is it going to be tough for Zinter, I guess, for a while until that hand heals for him to really reach his potential there?
Well, number one, everybody that's ever played offensive line through high school or certainly into the higher levels of the game, you've played with smashed hands, fingers, ripped off fingernails, broken bones in certain parts. You tape that stuff up and you keep going. What Zinter has going appears to be far more than just that. He's got his entire right hand is covered with a whole padding, and he doesn't have the use of his fingers and his thumb to grab onto a defender and lock those hands onto a defender like you really have to as an offensive line. If there's any good news, his good hand is his left hand. If you're playing right guard, your key hand, the one that controls everything and really drives everything, especially on pass blocking, is his left hand. So I think he'll be able to play. There was a guy that played at Michigan when I was there that did all right with an entirely covered hand when he ripped his fingernails off in a mysterious dorm room door incident. He played. They just wrap it up and you played. He played center. His name was Steve Everett. He was okay. I think he did all right, and he didn't miss anything that spring. It can be absolutely done. Steve wasn't the first. He was one of many that have done it. I would expect that Zinter could do the same, as long as he's not going to go out and possibly make that injury worse. If it can't get any worse and they can protect it, it's time for him to suit up and play.
Yeah, that's got to hurt, right? When you're getting hand play with the defensive linemen and they see that, I mean, they're going to come down on that thing, aren't they?
They can, Balas, but it's so padded up, and they probably have some sort of soft layer in there, maybe even a hard layer. If they're going to put a kid on the field, especially nowadays, they're not going to do it with any risk of furthering an injury. Just the sensitivity around player protection and safety is so high right now. It's never been higher. So I don't worry about that. But sure, it's not going to be a pain thing. But for Zinter, when he goes to put his arms out there for pass protection, there's nothing to grab onto. Not that offensive linemen ever grab onto defensive dudes, because that never. But there's nothing. Use your hands in a way when you're playing. You keep your hands on the inside, and you're using your hands to move so much that it's a disadvantage if you don't have the ability to grab something. For sure, it's going to require he be even more disciplined in his technique. But we've seen some pretty good things out of that young player, and he can do it.
Yeah, he can. Would you like to explain yourself with the fingernail thing with Everett, or is that a different topic for a different day?
People know the story. To make a long story short, in the spring of 1990-ish, somewhere, maybe 91, Steve had his fingernails accidentally, let me move that over, ripped off the end of his fingers in a door jam in the quad, south quad there. I picked up his fingernails, put them in my pocket, and we went to the ER. And the ER doctor stuck the fingernails back on top, wrapped them up, and we went to football practice the next day, and he played. He wrapped up his right hand, and he snapped with his left hand and didn't miss a practice. Wow. That is the kind of thing that can have an impact, and did have an impact on the fellow players on that team, that if this guy can play with ripped off fingernails and not miss a snap, and oh, by the way, he's center, he just switched hands and smashed with his left hand. Yeah, I think I can play some things too. So again, how does it relate to this Saturday? Zinter goes out there with an apparent hand injury. Let's just assume it's something that requires a big old fat cast. He goes out and plays. It sends a message to his fellow teammates and his team of how important it is to get on that field and play for Michigan, and he can have an impact without saying a word.
Yeah, and I think he will. I think you're going to see a lot of him. I wouldn't be surprised, frankly, if he didn't start in that game, being really, I think Jim Harbaugh called him one of their best offensive players, if not the best offensive player. The other one of them, Ronnie Bell. And really, you cannot overstate how much of a loss this is. And I understand that this is a deep position scheme, but when you're talking about your best blocker, you're talking about the guy who runs the best routes and gets open, and you're talking about a guy that has more want to probably than anybody on that offense, and has shown that, in my opinion, in the last 3 years. Roman Wilson, the young wide receiver, said, we got to do it for Ronnie, and I get it. However, there's no Desmond Howard. This is not Derek Alexander going down, and you've got the Desmond Howard behind him to pick up the slack here. This is going to be a huge blow, in my opinion.
It's going to be, Balas, and the other thing that Ronnie Bell brings to the team, as we all can see as fans on Saturdays, is the positive body language that he brings to the field. The way that kid just bounces around the field. He's consistently congratulating and celebrating with his teammates, slapping them on the helmet, pumping them up on the shoulder pads, high fives. He just brought an energy to the football field that was so blatantly obvious that's going to be missed. Someone else needs to collectively make up for that loss. And I'm okay with these guys playing emotional football for a fallen teammate if that's what it takes. But you got to go out and you've got to execute. And one of the other lessons from watching Ronnie Bell play the last couple of years is when you do make a mistake, you keep playing, you keep grinding, and you keep playing. And that's the other thing that is admirable about the way Ronnie Bell plays the game for Michigan the last couple of years. And we'll see how he responds here, but he's not going to be out there. He's not going to be in that huddle. So this is not a new phenomenon. Someone else has to step up and play just as well, if not better. And it can happen. You just got to go make it happen.
The expectation is for the position. Did you hear that your first day of practice at Michigan?
First day, third day, 30th day, every day for 5 years. The expectation is you play your best for Michigan and you do what you need to do for this team to win. And I'm sure that's the same messaging that's being delivered this week in the loss of Mr. Bell out there in that wide receiver core. But again, going back to the Western game, we saw enough positive things from that group and some of the blocking and some of the route running and catching that the indicators are there that they're more than capable of being successful without Ronnie out there in that lineup.
Yeah, you watched some film on Washington. I did too. I didn't think their offensive line got any push. Now, granted, and in fact, there were times that Montana caved that pocket when they were passing. They were without, I think, three or four of their top receivers. I don't know if they're going to get them back or not, but I can tell you this. They have an opportunity here to salvage their season, at least to the extent of, okay, we're embarrassed. We can get it back on track. They haven't played a single Pac-12 game yet, so they've still got the conference season to go. And they're going to come in here. I think Michigan's going to get their best game. I don't think there's any question about it. What'd you see from them on film that you thought, okay, this might be a matchup problem for Michigan?
Matchup problems for Michigan. I don't know that there's going to be anything that just is like, oh my gosh, I don't know how we're going to deal with this. I think it's just going to be a heightened challenge. As I mentioned earlier, the interior defensive line for Washington is physically more imposing and physically more capable than the Western Michigan offense or defensive line. So Michigan's offensive line is going to have a new and higher challenge here this Saturday. Same thing goes for their linebackers. They run better. They're bigger. They're faster. They can run faster. All those things. So that alone is going to require Michigan to play better. One of the things that stuck out to me on the other side of the ball is Montana was able to get some pressure on that Washington quarterback by running some simple line stunts, some twists, and a couple things off the edge. It looked like their left tackle, left guard absolutely screwed up a tackle end twist early in that game and got their quarterback hit or at least pressured. So maybe, just maybe, Coach McDonald here dials up some defensive line games to test them on that. They absolutely should and see if it's going to work or not. We've got the guys that can execute those things. And you can run it the opposite way as well. You can run tackle and twist. We got Hutch who can make some great moves and get on some edges. So I think that may be something to watch. Of course, it always is in every football game. The other thing is the continued development and evolution of the Michigan backs in their pass blocking. Cade McNamara was able to make some really nice deep throws and some other throws in that football game because he was allowed to stand in the pocket and he had room immediately in front of him to step into the football and make a great throw. The running back blocking capabilities are critical, absolutely critical, that they have to be good to give him the space to do so. We saw some really good things out of Blake Corum, and then of course we know Hassan Haskins can do the same thing. That has to continue to get better. So the pass blocking will be critical because I'm guessing that there's going to be some commitment out of Washington to see just how good Mr. McNamara is and maybe crowd up around that line of scrimmage and force Michigan into a passing game. We didn't pass the football a ton in that game against Western, Balas. So will the Washington defensive front look at that as maybe a key to build into their game plan to say, okay, let's see what Michigan can really do in a passing game without Ronnie Bell and a quarterback who's making only his third start? If I were a defensive coordinator for Washington, that might be somewhere I would start.
Yeah, I would think so too. So it should be fascinating. I would imagine that Aiden Hutchinson, young Mr. Hutchinson, is going to get a lot more attention. To be honest, I thought he was really the one guy that got significant pass rush consistently. And David Ojabo, maybe once or twice. I expected a little more out of him based on what we'd heard in camp. Some of the interior linemen. And granted, I thought there was a lot of max protect for Western. I think that's kind of what they do. And when they lost their number one receiver, that didn't help them. But to me, it's going to be, okay, what happens when they try to neutralize Aiden Hutchinson? They're going to need other guys to step up.
Well, and one of the things they can do to help Hutch is get him involved in some games. So, like if he's playing, imagine he's playing the right defensive end and he's got a defensive tackle line mate to his inside. If you put on a tackle end twist, that defensive tackle can absorb the offensive guard and maybe get to the hip of the offensive tackle that was planning on blocking him. And then Hutch can make this great little move and relax, dip his shoulder and get rid of a hand with an arm bar and get upfield into the backfield. You can help Hutch if they slant their protection in a way that's going to take him out. If you just let him out there and be in a one-on-one, it's easy to help your offensive lineman. Put a tight end over there, put your back over there to help Chip on his way out into a flat little route or whatever. So this defense of Michigan can help him with some line stunts and then mix in some linebacker combination defensive line games. Make an offensive lineman think about this and get Hutch into a situation where he is at his best, which is dipping a shoulder and getting on an edge or a hip of an opposing offensive lineman. I would look for Michigan to do some of that if they find a way to neutralize him. But Balas, you made the point it's earlier, and it's absolutely valid. The other guys on that defensive line need to find a way to get pressure themselves, and that will really cause problems for an opposing offensive line and coordinator to figure out how to buy time for their quarterback.
Yeah. Last thing, Skene, who, by the way, was breaking news rooting for Michigan to win last Saturday, did not pawn off his 5 Big Ten championship rings at the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop there. So
I did not.
It did not. So night games, you played in what, 1 or 2 night games when you were at Michigan?
I played on a few. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Is it hard? I mean, waiting around all day for that thing. What do? You just sit around, watch football all day?
Yeah, you sit around, you watch football all day. You're looking out the hotel room, peeking up over the horizon, looking at Michigan Stadium, seeing how much the tailgating is getting going over there. And it's going to be exciting. It's going to be fun because it's going to be a warm fall Saturday night. And so, the crowd's going to be juiced up, ready to go. It should be a great night for fans and the players to be in there. But yeah, if reveille is still early in the morning, you're sitting around all day. It's not like the players are allowed to sleep in till 10, 11 o'clock and get up and watch SpongeBob. So, you got to get your ass out of bed, get taped up, get some food in you, and start to get ready. They'll have meetings. I'm sure they'll have meetings. They'll look at some film. They'll revise and touch up their game plan with any late additions or focal points they want to work on. They'll be productive during the day, Balas. But these players will have to, as they used to say to us, hold their water and just relax for an extra 6 hours throughout the course of the day before they get on that bus and head over to the stadium.
But of course, it wasn't SpongeBob back then; it was Bugs Bunny or something, and I think he's since been canceled. So anyway,
Yeah, right.
The good old days, Roadrunner, Coyote, too much violence.
Those were the best.
Those were the best.
Roadrunner and Coyote, come on.
That's great stuff, Skene. I appreciate it, man. We will talk to you. We have In the Trenches coming up tomorrow, folks. Normally it'd be earlier in the week. Some plays from the Western Michigan game that Skene broke down and did a great job. So we will talk to you on Sunday after the game. Here's looking forward to a Michigan win.
All right, go Blue.